March 17, 1943. In a fortified bunker beneath the Wilhelmstrasse in Berlin, Oberingenieur Klaus Richter stared at an intelligence summary that his hands refused to stop trembling. The document, stamped with red classification markings, contained production figures from American shipyards that violated every principle of naval architecture he had spent 30 years mastering. 2,700 merchant vessels. That was the projected annual output from American facilities for 1943. Not over a decade. Not across the entire war. In a single year. Richter had graduated first in his class from the Technical University of Berlin in 1913. He had designed components for the battlecruiser Derfflinger. He had overseen the construction of merchant raiders during the Great War. He understood steel tolerances, welding limitations, and the immutable laws of shipyard capacity. What this report claimed was not merely improbable, it was physically impossible. A cargo vessel of 10,000 tons required approximately 250,000 individual parts, each manufactured to precise specifications. German yards at Blohm and Voss, Germania Werft, and Deutsche Werke took between 6 and 8 months to construct comparable vessels using methods refined over generations. These were facilities staffed by master craftsmen whose fathers and grandfathers had built ships using techniques passed down through family lines. Men who could identify a structural flaw by the sound of a riveting hammer, welders who understood metal crystallization at the molecular level. Yet here was documented evidence from multiple intelligence sources, photographs intercepted from neutral Swedish journalists, reports from Swiss engineers who had toured American facilities, radio intercepts of production announcements broadcast openly on American frequencies. The Americans were not merely building ships faster, they were building them at speeds that made German production look like the work of medieval craftsmen hammering together river barges. If this intelligence was accurate, Germany faced an opponent whose industrial capacity exceeded anything in human history. An opponent who could absorb losses that would cripple any European nation and replace them before the wreckage stopped smouldering. An opponent who had transformed shipbuilding from a craft into a science of mass production that treated 10,000-ton vessels like components rolling off an automobile assembly line. This is the story of how German engineering excellence confronted American industrial pragmatism, how centuries of maritime tradition collided with assembly line innovation, and how one nation's belief in quality craftsmanship was buried under an avalanche of adequate ships produced at impossible speeds. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Klaus Richter was not a political man. He cared nothing for Nazi ideology or imperial ambitions. He was an engineer, a builder, a man who understood the physical limitations of steel, rivets, and human labor. When he received his appointment to the Reichsministerium für Bewaffnung und Munition in 1942, he approached it as a technical challenge rather than a patriotic duty. His task was simple: assess Allied production capacity and project Germany's industrial requirements for sustained warfare. The work suited his methodical temperament. He analyzed tonnage reports from the Kriegsmarine. He studied construction timelines from German shipyards. He calculated steel production ratios and labor force requirements. The mathematics provided comfort. Numbers did not lie or exaggerate. They revealed truth with absolute clarity. German shipbuilding represented the pinnacle of European industrial achievement. The yards at Hamburg and Kiel had constructed vessels for the Imperial Navy that had challenged British supremacy in the North Sea during the Great War. The techniques employed there had been refined through trial and error spanning centuries. A German ship left the yards with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Hull plates fitted so precisely that water could not penetrate between them. Propeller shafts balanced to eliminate vibration at any speed. This was not merely craftsmanship. It was engineering as art form. Each vessel represented the accumulated knowledge of generations of maritime architects who understood that ships operated in the most unforgiving environment on Earth. The ocean destroyed weak joints. Salt water corroded inferior welds. Storm seas revealed every structural flaw. German ships endured because they were built correctly, regardless of time or cost. The British built good ships. Richter acknowledged this without hesitation. Royal Navy vessels demonstrated solid engineering and adequate construction methods. Not German standards, perhaps, but respectable work that reflected Britain's long maritime tradition. The French had produced capable designs before their collapse. The Italians understood aesthetics, if not always structural integrity. The Americans, however, remained something of a mystery. Before the war, American shipyards had focused primarily on commercial vessels and a modest naval construction program. Nothing in their pre-war output suggested exceptional capability. They built slowly, expensively, and with frequent delays. The American way of doing things emphasized quantity over quality, mass production over precision. This approach worked adequately for automobiles and refrigerators. Ships required different thinking. When Richter first received intelligence estimates of American production capacity in early 1942, he dismissed them as obvious errors. The numbers suggested output rates that exceeded British and German yards combined. Impossible, he wrote in his assessment. Intelligence source requires verification, probable propaganda or mathematical error in translation. But the reports kept coming. Different sources, different methodologies, all reaching the same impossible conclusions. By summer of 1942, Richter could no longer dismiss the data as faulty intelligence. Something extraordinary was happening in American shipyards, something that violated every principle of naval construction he understood. He requested detailed technical specifications of American vessels. What arrived shocked him more than the production numbers. The Americans were not building traditional ships. They were manufacturing floating boxes using techniques borrowed from automotive assembly lines. Welded hulls instead of riveted construction, prefabricated sections instead of custom fitting, standardized components instead of individual craftsmanship. The Liberty ship design represented everything German engineering found offensive. It was crude, inelegant, barely adequate for its intended purpose. The hull lines were ugly. The machinery was simple to the point of primitive. The entire vessel looked like something assembled from a children's construction kit rather than crafted by skilled maritime architects. Richter showed the specifications to Hermann Blohm, whose family had built ships in Hamburg since 1877. The old man studied the drawings with increasing horror. "This is not a ship," Blohm declared. "This is a cargo container with an engine. It will crack in heavy seas. The welded joints will fail. They are sacrificing their crews to production quotas." But the intelligence reports indicated otherwise. The Liberty ships were crossing the Atlantic successfully. They were delivering cargo to Britain despite operating in waters infested with U-boats. They were surviving storms that should have torn their welded hulls apart. Somehow, these inadequate vessels were functioning, despite their obvious design compromises. The breakthrough in understanding came from an unexpected source. A German engineer captured in North Africa had spent several months in an American prison camp before being repatriated through neutral Switzerland. During his captivity, he had observed American manufacturing facilities producing war materials. What he described sounded more like science fiction than industrial reality. The Americans, he reported, had fundamentally reconceived the manufacturing process. Instead of building complex items from start to finish in single locations, they broke production into countless small tasks distributed across vast networks of facilities. Components arrived at final assembly points from hundreds of different suppliers. Workers with minimal training performed single repetitive tasks rather than mastering entire crafts. This approach, he explained, allowed the Americans to employ anyone capable of following basic instructions. Women, elderly, workers, people who had never seen a factory before in their lives. The traditional German approach required skilled craftsmen who needed years of training. The American system needed only warm bodies capable of operating machines designed to be foolproof. Richter understood the implications immediately. Germany's industrial strength rested on skilled labor, specialized facilities, and integrated production chains. This was efficient in peacetime, but became a vulnerability in total war. When skilled workers died in combat or were drafted into military service, Germany lost irreplaceable expertise. When Allied bombing damaged a critical facility, entire production chains collapsed. The Americans faced no such limitations. Their distributed manufacturing network meant that destroying one facility barely impacted overall production. Their simplified training requirements meant they could replace workers as quickly as they could recruit them. Their standardized components meant that any facility could produce parts for any final assembly point without requiring specialized knowledge or equipment. It was brilliant in its pragmatism. It abandoned centuries of craft tradition in favor of pure industrial efficiency. It treated ships not as unique creations, but as standardized products manufactured like any other commodity. And it worked because the Americans cared nothing for maritime tradition or engineering elegance. They cared only about getting functional vessels into the water as quickly as possible. The man behind this revolution was not even a shipbuilder. Henry Kaiser had made his fortune constructing dams and highways in the American West. He understood concrete, earth-moving, and project management on massive scales. Ships. He had never built one before receiving contracts from the United States Maritime Commission in 1941. This fact alone would have disqualified him from serious consideration in Germany. German shipyards were family businesses, passed through generations. You learned the trade from your father, who learned from his father, stretching back centuries. The idea of a dam builder deciding to construct ships would have been dismissed as absurd. But Kaiser possessed something more valuable than maritime tradition. He understood industrial systems. He knew how to break complex projects into manageable components. He recognized that most shipbuilding tasks did not actually require master craftsmen, only workers trained in specific repetitive operations. Kaiser looked at the Liberty ship design, a simplified British cargo vessel, and saw an assembly problem rather than a craft challenge. Where traditional shipbuilders saw a vessel requiring hundreds of skilled workers laboring for months, Kaiser saw a collection of prefabricated modules that could be manufactured simultaneously and joined together in days. He built shipyards that functioned like automobile factories. Massive cranes moved hull sections weighing hundreds of tons. Workers welded joints in minutes that would have required hours of riveting. Assembly proceeded around the clock, with shifts changing every 8 hours, so that construction never stopped. Meals were brought to workers at their stations, so they would not waste time walking to cafeterias. The results defied belief. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, took 245 days to build using conventional methods. Within months, Kaiser's yards had reduced this to 75 days. By late 1942, construction times had dropped below 30 days. Then came the record that would haunt German planners for the remainder of the war. November 12, 1942. Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California. The SS Robert E. Peary. 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. A complete 10,000-ton cargo vessel, built faster than most German yards could manufacture a single large boiler. When this intelligence reached Berlin, Richter's superiors demanded verification. The report must be propaganda, they insisted. American exaggeration intended to damage German morale. Richter conducted his own analysis using multiple intelligence sources. Photographs showing the vessel under construction with timestamps, radio intercepts of the launch ceremony. Reports from neutral observers who had witnessed the event directly. The Peary was real. The construction timeline was accurate. The Americans had proven that shipbuilding, that most ancient and traditional of crafts, could be transformed into an industrial process approaching the speed of automobile production. And they had done it not once as a publicity stunt, but as proof that their methods could produce functional vessels at speeds previously considered impossible. Richter sat in his office overlooking the Spree River and calculated the implications. If the Americans could build a ship in 4 days when optimal conditions aligned, what were their realistic sustained production rates? His most conservative estimates suggested 1,200 vessels per year. His more aggressive projections reached 2,000 ships annually. He compared these numbers against German and British production combined. Germany could produce perhaps 100 merchant vessels per year under optimal conditions. Britain, despite extensive bombing of their shipyards, might manage 200. Even adding Japanese production, the Axis powers could not approach 400 ships annually. The mathematics were brutal. If the Americans maintained even half their projected production rate, they would build more merchant tonnage in a single year than the Kriegsmarine could possibly sink. German U-boats were averaging perhaps 100 sinkings per month under favorable conditions. Call it 1,200 ships per year destroyed. But the Americans were building more than that to replace losses, plus adding to overall fleet capacity. The equation was simple. Germany needed to sink more ships than America could build. America was building them faster than Germany could possibly sink them. The gap was not close. It was not even competitive. It was a mathematical certainty of defeat disguised as a production statistic. Richter drafted his assessment in careful language. He had learned that pessimistic reports in Nazi Germany could be dangerous for their authors. Direct statements about inevitable defeat invited accusations of defeatism or worse. He couched his conclusions in technical terminology and probability analysis. Current intelligence indicates American merchant vessel production capacity approaching 2,000 units annually, he wrote. German U-boat operations average approximately 1,200 sinkings per year under optimal conditions. This creates a negative attrition ratio unfavorable to strategic objectives. Recommend reassessment of Atlantic operations in context of enemy industrial capacity. Report traveled through military bureaucracy for 3 weeks before reaching Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. The commander of Germany's U-boat fleet was a practical man who understood numbers. He read Richter's assessment twice, then summoned his own staff for independent verification. Their analysis confirmed the engineer's conclusions. The Battle of the Atlantic was becoming a war of production rather than tactics, and Germany was losing that war catastrophically. Dönitz faced an impossible dilemma. The U-boat campaign represented Germany's only means of striking at Allied logistics. Abandoning the Atlantic meant conceding unlimited supply shipments to Britain, enabling the eventual invasion of Europe. Continuing operations meant accepting mounting submarine losses against targets that were being replaced faster than they could be sunk. Either choice led to defeat, only at different speeds. He ordered continuation of operations with modified tactics, focus on tankers carrying fuel, target troop transports, prioritize high-value vessels over bulk cargo ships. These adjustments might improve the efficiency of sinkings, but they could not change the fundamental mathematics. America was outbuilding Germany by ratios that made tactical excellence irrelevant. The spring of 1943 brought confirmation of the disaster Richter had predicted. In May alone, 41 U-boats were sunk, the highest monthly loss rate of the entire war. Dönitz temporarily withdrew submarines from the North Atlantic while developing new tactics and equipment. But the withdrawal came too late to change strategic realities. America's shipyards had already reached full production capacity, and the vessels rolling off assembly lines were crossing the Atlantic in convoys protected by increasingly sophisticated defenses. Richter received reports of American merchant vessel sightings with increasing frequency. Convoys that once numbered 20 ships now contained 50 or more. Individual sinkings that had once damaged Allied supply chains now represented barely noticeable losses replaced within days. The mathematics that had seemed so clear in his Berlin office were playing out with mathematical precision across the Atlantic Ocean. He calculated the true scope of American industrial achievement in June 1943. Since Pearl Harbor, American yards had launched over 1,000 new merchant vessels. Germany's entire merchant fleet at the start of the war had been approximately 2,500 ships accumulated over decades. The Americans were building the equivalent of half Germany's pre-war merchant capacity every year while simultaneously expanding their naval forces, constructing aircraft at unprecedented rates, and producing tanks, trucks, and artillery in quantities that exceeded Axis production combined. The disparity was not merely industrial, it was philosophical. German production emphasized quality over quantity. Skilled, craftsmanship over mass production, engineering excellence over adequate functionality. These were values deeply embedded in German industrial culture, principles that had served the nation well for generations. They produced superior tanks, excellent aircraft, and ships built to standards that exceeded any rival. But in total war, superiority mattered less than sufficiency produced at scale. A German Panther tank was objectively superior to an American Sherman, but Germany produced 6,000 Panthers during the entire war. America produced 50,000 Shermans. A German-type XXI U-boat represented the most advanced submarine technology in the world, but it took 10 months to build one. In the same time, American shipyards could produce dozens of destroyer escorts specifically designed to hunt submarines. Quality required time, skilled labor, and specialized facilities. Quantity required only adequate designs, simplified production methods, and sufficient raw materials. America had chosen quantity deliberately, consciously, trading individual excellence for overwhelming numbers. And the strategy was working because wars were won by the side that could sustain operations, not the side that built the best individual weapons. Richter understood this with the clarity of an engineer trained to see systems rather than components. He also understood that this knowledge changed nothing. Germany's industrial base could not be transformed to match American production methods. The skilled craftsmen who built German ships could not be replaced by minimally trained workers. The integrated production chains that created German excellence could not be distributed across networks of simple facilities. Germany was locked into its approach by infrastructure, culture, and the physical limitations of a nation under siege. American factories operated 3,000 miles from the nearest enemy bomber. German facilities faced continuous air raids that destroyed specialized equipment and killed irreplaceable workers. America had access to unlimited steel, aluminum, and rubber from sources spread across the globe. Germany struggled to maintain supplies of basic materials as Allied forces closed supply routes. The war was being decided not on battlefields, but in factories. Not by the skill of soldiers, but by the productivity of workers. Not through tactical brilliance, but through industrial mathematics. And Germany had lost that war before the first shot was fired, because it had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of modern industrial conflict. The intelligence report that arrived in late summer of 1943 confirmed what Richter had known for months. American shipyards were now launching 3 merchant vessels per day on average. 3 complete cargo ships every 24 hours. More than 90 ships per month, over 1,000 per year from the Kaiser yards alone, before counting production from dozens of other American facilities. He did the mathematics one final time, hoping to find some error in his calculations, some oversight that would change the conclusion. The numbers remained constant. America would produce 2,700 merchant vessels in 1943. Germany would sink perhaps 1,200 Allied ships total, including vessels built by Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations. The net gain in Allied shipping capacity would exceed 1,000 vessels in a single year. By 1944, the disparity would grow larger. By 1945, Allied shipping capacity would exceed pre-war levels despite 5 years of continuous combat. The U-boats were not losing battles. They were fighting an equation that could not be solved through tactical excellence or strategic brilliance. They were drowning in statistics, suffocating under production numbers, being crushed by industrial capacity that exceeded anything in human history. Richter closed his report and filed it, in the secure archives of the Reichsministerium. No one would read it. No one wanted to acknowledge what the numbers revealed. German leadership preferred to believe in wonder weapons, secret technologies, and strategic breakthroughs that would somehow reverse the tide. They dismissed production statistics as defeatist thinking, preferring heroic narratives about quality defeating quantity. But mathematics did not care about narratives or ideology or national character. Mathematics revealed truth with absolute clarity, and the truth was that Germany had already lost the war it was still fighting. Lost it not through battlefield defeats or strategic failures, but through a simple equation that could not be changed. America could build ships faster than Germany could sink them. Everything else was just the details of defeat playing out in slow motion. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The winter of 1943 brought no relief from the industrial nightmare that Richter had documented so thoroughly. Intelligence reports continued arriving with monotonous regularity, each one confirming the projections he had calculated months earlier. American merchant vessel production had not merely sustained its impossible pace, it had accelerated. The Kaiser yards in Richmond, California now operated 7 separate facilities simultaneously. Each one functioned as an independent production line, launching vessels on schedules that treated shipbuilding like an assembly process. Overhead photographs acquired through neutral sources showed cargo ships lined up at launchways like automobiles waiting to leave a factory. The images would have been comical if their implications were not so devastating. Traditional European shipyards built vessels in dry docks or on slipways where they remained until completion. This approach meant that each facility could only construct one ship at a time, with production limited by the number of available building positions. Kaiser had eliminated this bottleneck through prefabrication. His yards manufactured hull sections, deck houses, and machinery assemblies in buildings spread across hundreds of acres. These components were then brought together at final assembly points, where massive cranes joined them like puzzle pieces. The system allowed dozens of ships to be under construction simultaneously at various stages of completion. While one vessel was being launched, 3 more were receiving their final assemblies, and 20 others were having their prefabricated sections manufactured. The entire facility operated like a manufacturing pipeline that maintained constant output regardless of how many individual vessels were in production. Hermann Blohm had called this approach offensive to maritime tradition. Richter had come to see it as something far more significant. It was a revolution in thinking about industrial warfare. The Americans had recognized that in total war, traditional concepts of quality and craftsmanship became less important than the ability to produce adequate equipment at overwhelming scales. A Liberty ship was not a good ship by German standards. It was slow, with a maximum speed of only 11 knots. Its steam engines were simple but inefficient. Its hull design prioritized cargo capacity over seaworthiness. In calm seas, it wallowed. In heavy weather, it flexed and creaked in ways that would have horrified German naval architects. Yet these inadequate vessels were winning the Battle of the Atlantic simply by existing in such numbers that sinking them became pointless. The reports from U-boat commanders reflected this reality with increasing desperation. They were still finding targets. The North Atlantic remained full of convoys carrying supplies to Britain, but sinking 3 or 4 merchantmen from a convoy no longer seemed to matter when the same convoy route would see dozens more vessels the following week. For every ship sent to the bottom, 5 more appeared to take its place. Kapitän-Leutnant Werner Henke commanded U-515 in the autumn of 1943. His boat had survived 21 patrols, an extraordinary record when average U-boat life expectancy had dropped to less than 6 months. Henke was a skilled commander who understood convoy tactics and could position his submarine for optimal attack angles. His crew was experienced, well-trained, and efficient at torpedo operations. On October 15, 1943, U-515 encountered convoy ONS-20 bound for North America. Henke counted 48 merchant vessels escorted by 11 warships. 3 years earlier, such a convoy would have been considered impossibly large. Now it was routine. He maneuvered into attack position during darkness and fired a spread of 4 torpedoes at what appeared to be a tanker. 2 torpedoes struck home. The tanker, a Liberty ship converted to carry fuel, exploded in a fireball that illuminated the entire convoy. The destroyer escorts immediately began their counterattack, dropping depth charges that bracketed U-515's position. Henke took his boat deep and evaded, using techniques he had perfected over 2 years of combat. By dawn, he had escaped and was searching for another convoy to attack. He sank 3 more merchantmen over the next week. Each kill was photographed through the periscope for intelligence purposes. Each represented a successful tactical engagement. Yet Henke returned to port with a growing sense that individual victories no longer mattered. The convoys kept coming. The ships kept sailing. The American production lines kept launching replacement vessels faster than U-boats could possibly sink them. His patrol report contained a paragraph that found its way to Richter's desk via the Naval Intelligence Network. "We are winning tactical engagements but losing the strategic war," Henke wrote. "For every ship we sink, the enemy produces 3. Our operational losses are unsustainable. The mathematics are against us." Richter recognized his own conclusions reflected in a combat officer's assessment. The U-boat fleet was discovering what production analysis had revealed months earlier. They were fighting an equation that could not be solved through skill or courage or tactical brilliance. They were drowning in American industrial capacity expressed as endless waves of adequate ships produced at impossible speeds. The German Naval High Command convened in December 1943 to assess U-boat operations. Dönitz presented casualty figures that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. 161 U-boats lost in 1943 alone, over 9,000 submariners dead. The Atlantic had become a graveyard for German submarines, with loss rates approaching 50% per patrol. Yet these staggering losses had achieved what? Intelligence estimated 1,200 Allied merchant vessels sunk during the same period, a significant number by any historical measure. In previous wars, such losses would have crippled an enemy's maritime capabilities for years. But American production statistics indicated net Allied shipping capacity had actually increased during 1943, despite these losses. Richter attended this meeting as a technical advisor. He watched senior officers struggle to comprehend how tactical victories could result in strategic defeat. The mathematics were simple, but their implications were so devastating that accepting them required acknowledging that the entire U-boat campaign had become futile. One admiral suggested focusing on higher-value targets, sink tankers instead of cargo vessels. Each tanker destroyed would eliminate fuel supplies worth dozens of ordinary merchantmen. The logic seemed sound until Richter pointed out that American shipyards were producing tankers at the same impossible rates as cargo ships. Intelligence indicated over 100 new tankers launched in 1943 alone, more than replacing losses. Another officer proposed developing new submarine technologies. The Type XXI boats under development would be faster, quieter, and more capable than current U-boats. They would restore German tactical superiority and allow more effective attacks on convoys. Richter did not dispute the Type XXI's technical excellence. The design was genuinely revolutionary, but production timelines showed the first operational boats would not enter service until late 1944 at the earliest. By then, American shipyards would have produced another 3,000 merchant vessels. The meeting concluded without meaningful decisions, because no meaningful decisions remained available. Germany could continue U-boat operations and accept mounting losses while achieving negligible strategic impact. Or, Germany could withdraw from the Atlantic entirely and concede unlimited supply shipments to Britain. Either choice led to the same outcome, only at different speeds. Richter left the meeting and returned to his office overlooking the Spree. The river was frozen, its surface covered with ice that reflected the winter sky. Berlin itself was changing as the war ground on. Buildings bore scars from Allied bombing raids. Food rationing had grown stricter. Luxury goods had disappeared from shops. The confident atmosphere of early war victories had given way to grim determination tinged with growing doubt. He pulled out his production files and reviewed the latest intelligence summaries. The numbers had grown so large they were losing meaning. 2,700 merchant vessels produced by America in 1943. Projections suggested similar or higher output for 1944. Add British production of perhaps 300 ships. Canadian facilities contributing another 100. The Allied merchant fleet was not merely recovering from losses, it was expanding beyond pre-war capacity while simultaneously supporting global military operations across multiple theatres. The Liberty ship program alone represented industrial achievement unprecedented in human history. American yards had now produced over 2,000 of these vessels. 2,000 ships, each weighing 10,000 tons, each carrying enough cargo to sustain a small city for months. The combined cargo capacity of these vessels exceeded that of Germany's entire pre-war merchant fleet many times over. And they were building them in 4 days when conditions aligned perfectly. 4 days to construct something that should have required 8 months. The SS Robert E. Peary remained the record holder, but other vessels were being completed in 6 days, 7 days, 10 days. Times that would have been considered impossible in 1941 were now routine production schedules. Richter understood the technical methods that enabled these speeds. Prefabrication allowed parallel manufacturing of components. Welding accelerated hull assembly compared to riveting. Simplified designs reduced complexity. Standardized parts eliminated custom fitting. Distributed production networks prevented bottlenecks. Each innovation made logical sense when examined individually. But the cumulative effect was transformative. The Americans had not merely improved shipbuilding efficiency. They had reconceived it as an industrial process divorced from maritime tradition. They had treated ships as manufactured products rather than crafted vessels. And in doing so, they had achieved production rates that were defeating Germany more effectively than any naval battle could. The Victory ship program that began in 1943 represented the next evolution of American methods. These vessels addressed the Liberty ship's performance limitations while maintaining the production techniques that enabled mass manufacturing. Victory ships were faster, better armed, and more capable than their predecessors. Yet American yards were building them at nearly the same impossible rates, proving that the production revolution was not limited to simplified designs. Intelligence photographs showed Victory ships rolling off assembly lines with the same conveyor belt efficiency as Liberty ships. The Americans had learned how to mass-produce not just adequate vessels, but genuinely capable ones. They had solved the challenge that German engineers had considered impossible, creating production systems that delivered both quantity and acceptable quality simultaneously. February 1944 brought news that Richter had been dreading. Allied forces had landed at Anzio in Italy, establishing a beachhead supplied entirely by sea. The invasion fleet had included over 300 vessels delivering troops, equipment, and supplies directly onto hostile shores. German air attacks, artillery bombardment sank or damaged several dozen ships. Within a week, replacement vessels had arrived to continue supply operations. This was the new reality of warfare against opponents with unlimited industrial capacity. Tactical victories that destroyed enemy equipment no longer mattered because that equipment was replaced faster than it could be destroyed. German forces could win every engagement and still lose campaigns because American production delivered continuous reinforcement that German industry could not match. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 demonstrated this principle on an overwhelming scale. Allied planners assembled over 6,000 vessels for Operation Overlord. 6,000 ships, ranging from massive battleships to small landing craft, all produced within the previous 3 years. The armada that crossed the English Channel represented industrial capacity that exceeded anything in military history. Richter received intelligence summaries of the invasion fleet with a sense of detached fascination. As an engineer, he could appreciate the organizational achievement represented by coordinating 6,000 vessels for a single operation. As a German, he understood that his nation faced opponents whose industrial power made resistance futile. The Normandy invasion was not primarily a military operation. It was an industrial demonstration, a display of production capacity so overwhelming that opposing it resembled fighting a force of nature. German forces defending Normandy destroyed hundreds of landing craft and damaged dozens of larger vessels. These losses would have crippled any conventional invasion force. The Allies simply brought forward replacement vessels and continued operations. Within a week, artificial harbours called mulberries were operational, allowing direct supply of invasion forces without requiring captured ports. Within a month, Allied forces were receiving more supplies through these improvised facilities than flowed through many established harbours. The mathematics that had haunted Richter since 1943 were playing out across every theater. In the Pacific, American shipyards were producing escort carriers, destroyers, and amphibious vessels at rates that allowed simultaneous operations across thousands of miles of ocean. In the Atlantic, convoy systems operated with such frequency that U-boats could no longer find gaps between them. In the Mediterranean, Allied naval forces maintained continuous pressure on Italian and German positions through sheer weight of available vessels. Quality no longer mattered when quantity reached such levels. A German Bismarck-class battleship was objectively superior to any American battleship, but Germany had built 2. America had built dozens. A German Type 9 U-boat was more capable than most American submarines, but Germany produced 1,100 U-boats during the entire war. America produced 257 fleet submarines plus hundreds of smaller vessels, all while simultaneously building the merchant fleet that was sustaining global operations. The disparity was cosmic. One side was fighting with carefully rationed resources and irreplaceable equipment. The other had unlocked industrial capacity that treated ships like consumable supplies to be produced and expended as needed. Wars between such mismatched opponents had only one possible outcome. By autumn of 1944, Richter's reports had become increasingly brief. There was nothing new to say. American production continued at impossible rates. German forces fought skillfully and died bravely while achieving nothing of strategic significance. The war was being decided by factory workers in Detroit, shipyard welders in California, and steel mill operators in Pennsylvania. German soldiers and sailors were merely experiencing the consequences of industrial equations that had been determined years earlier. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 provided final confirmation of American naval supremacy, achieved through production rather than tactical excellence. The engagement involved over 300 American vessels, including 18 aircraft carriers and 12 battleships. This single task force deployed more combat power than Japan possessed in its entire remaining fleet. The disparity existed because American shipyards had produced vessels faster than combat operations could destroy them. German naval observers studied reports of Leyte Gulf with professional interest and personal despair. The battle demonstrated that modern naval warfare had become an industrial contest rather than a tactical competition. The side with superior production capacity could afford to lose vessels, aircraft, and equipment while maintaining offensive momentum. The side with limited industrial base could win tactical victories but lose strategic campaigns through simple attrition. Richter drafted his final assessment in December 1944. He titled it Industrial Capacity as Decisive Factor in Modern Warfare, and included comprehensive statistical analysis of Allied versus Axis production across all major categories. The document ran to 47 pages of tables, charts, and projections. Its conclusion required only a single paragraph. Allied industrial capacity, particularly American production, exceeds Axis capabilities by ratios ranging from 3:1 in steel production to 10:1 in merchant shipbuilding. This disparity makes sustained resistance impossible regardless of tactical competence or strategic planning. Material losses that cripple Axis operations are replaced by Allied industry within weeks. The war's outcome was determined by production capacity, not battlefield performance. The report was filed in archives that would be captured by Soviet forces 4 months later. Richter did not know whether anyone in German leadership ever read his conclusions. By December 1944, such reports were unnecessary. Everyone could see what the statistics had revealed years earlier. Germany was losing because it could not match Allied production. All other factors were details. The final accounting of American shipbuilding achievement became clear only after the war's conclusion. United States shipyards produced 5,777 merchant vessels during World War II. This total included 2,710 Liberty ships, 534 Victory ships, and hundreds of tankers, troop transports, and specialized cargo vessels. The combined tonnage exceeded 15 million tons, roughly equivalent to building the entire pre-war global merchant fleet in 4 years. Naval construction added hundreds of additional vessels, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and countless smaller craft rolled off American production lines at rates that sustained simultaneous operations across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Mediterranean. The industrial achievement represented not just quantitative production, but systematic organization of continental-scale manufacturing capacity directed toward a single purpose. The Liberty ship program that had seemed impossible to German engineers in 1943 had proven to be merely the beginning of American production expansion. Kaiser's revolutionary methods had been adopted and refined across the entire American shipbuilding industry. By 1944, yards from Maine to California were using prefabrication, welding, and modular assembly techniques that treated ship construction as an industrial process rather than a maritime craft. The SS Robert E. Peary's record of 4 days and 15 hours remained untouched. No shipyard anywhere has ever built a comparable vessel faster in the 83 years since that achievement. The record stands not because modern facilities lack the technology to match, plight it, but because they lack the necessity. Kaiser proved it could be done, and in proving it, demonstrated that industrial warfare favored nations capable of mobilizing production capacity on unprecedented scales. German engineering had approached warfare as a contest between superior and inferior equipment. American industry had approached it as a manufacturing problem to be solved through sufficient resources and systematic organization. The philosophical difference proved decisive. Quality required time and skilled labor. Quantity required adequate designs and efficient production systems. In total war, quantity delivered at speed defeated quality produced slowly. Klaus Richter survived the war, which was more than many German civilians could claim. Soviet forces captured Berlin in May 1945. He spent 3 years in various displaced persons camps before finally securing passage to Argentina in 1948. He worked as a consulting engineer in Buenos Aires, designing water treatment facilities and bridge supports. He never built ships again. In 1962, a journalist researching German wartime intelligence operations located Richter through former colleagues. The interview lasted 3 hours, conducted in a café overlooking the Rio de la Plata. The journalist asked when German leadership had realized they could not win the war. Richter thought for a long moment before answering. "We knew in 1943, he finally said, when we understood American production capacity. The intelligence on their shipyards, the Liberty ship program, that was when the mathematics became clear. Everything after was just waiting for the inevitable conclusion." "What would you have done differently?" the journalist asked. Richter laughed without humor. "Differently? There was nothing to do differently. You cannot fight industrial capacity with engineering excellence. You cannot sink mathematics. We lost the moment the Americans decided to treat shipbuilding like automobile production. We were building craft. They were manufacturing products. In industrial warfare, products win." The journalist's article appeared in several South American newspapers, but generated little interest. By 1962, World War II seemed distant history. Few readers cared about the obscure German engineer who had predicted defeat through production statistics. The article was forgotten, along with most of the details of how wars are actually won and lost. But Richter's assessment had been correct. The Battle of the Atlantic was decided not by U-boat tactics or convoy strategies, but by production mathematics. Germany sank over 3,000 Allied merchant vessels during the war. American shipyards produced over 5,000 new ones, while simultaneously building the naval forces that protected them. The equation was simple and devastating. One side could replace losses faster than the other could inflict them. The Liberty ships themselves survived far beyond their expected operational lives. Designed as temporary wartime expedients, many served for decades. The SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien remain operational today as floating museums. Both occasionally go to sea, demonstrating that the mass-produced vessels German engineers dismissed as inadequate have outlasted most of their critics. Henry Kaiser's legacy extended far beyond shipbuilding. After the war, he applied the same industrial principles to healthcare, founding Kaiser Permanente as a system that made medical services accessible through efficient organization. He built aluminum, steel, and cement companies, using production methods refined during wartime. Everything he touched demonstrated the same principle. Adequate quality delivered at scale defeats superior quality produced slowly. The techniques Kaiser pioneered became standard practice in global shipbuilding. Japanese yards rebuilt their post-war industry using modular construction and prefabrication. South Korean facilities that dominate modern commercial shipbuilding employ assembly methods that trace directly to Richmond Shipyard No. 2. Chinese yards producing vessels today use organizational structures that Kaiser would recognize instantly. Modern container ships, bulk carriers, and tankers are built using techniques that German engineers in 1943 considered impossible, or at least unacceptable for serious maritime construction. Welded hulls, prefabricated sections, modular assemblies, and standardized components are universal practices. The craft tradition that dominated shipbuilding for centuries gave way to industrial processes that treat vessels as manufactured products. The philosophical transformation that occurred during World War II extended beyond shipbuilding to reshape how industrial nations approach warfare entirely. Modern military doctrine assumes that combatants with superior production capacity hold decisive advantages, regardless of tactical skill or equipment quality. Wars are won by economies that can sustain operations, not armies that win individual battles. This was the lesson that German engineering learned too late. Klaus Richter had understood it by 1943 through statistical analysis and mathematical projection. German leadership continued fighting for 2 more years, achieving tactical victories that meant nothing because industrial mathematics had already determined the outcome. Quality could not defeat quantity when quantity was produced at sufficient scale and speed. The numbers tell the complete story. Germany built approximately 1,100 U-boats during the entire war, representing the largest submarine fleet in naval history and a monumental industrial effort. Those 1,100 submarines sank 3,000 merchant vessels at a terrible cost. 30,000 German submariners dead, the highest casualty rate of any service, but American yards produced 5,777 merchant vessels during the same period. Add British production of over 1,000 ships, Canadian facilities contributed hundreds more. The Allied merchant fleet was larger in 1945 than it had been in 1939, despite losing 3,000 vessels to U-boats, mines, aircraft, and surface raiders. The disparity was not close. It was not competitive. It was mathematical certainty expressed as industrial capacity. One side could build ships in 4 days when optimal conditions aligned. The other required 8 months for comparable vessels and lacked the resources to match production rates under any circumstances. The outcome was determined before the fighting began, visible to anyone who understood production mathematics and was willing to accept what those numbers revealed. The SS Robert E. Peary made 6 wartime voyages after her record-breaking launch. She carried cargo to the Mediterranean and Pacific theaters, surviving torpedo attacks and air raids that sank vessels built to higher standards with more careful craftsmanship. She was finally scrapped in 1963, 21 years after proving that shipbuilding could be transformed from a craft into an industrial process. That transformation changed warfare forever. Modern conflicts are decided by production capacity, not battlefield prowess. Nations with superior industrial organization defeat opponents with better individual equipment. Quantity produced at adequate quality levels overwhelms superior quality produced slowly. These principles seem obvious now, but they represented revolutionary thinking in an era when maritime tradition emphasized craftsmanship over manufacturing efficiency. German engineers in 1943 called American production projections fantasy, impossible fabrications intended to damage morale. They were correct that the numbers seemed impossible. They were wrong about whether the Americans could achieve them. Kaiser's yards built 2,700 Liberty ships alone, proving that adequate designs produced at revolutionary speeds could defeat superior vessels built slowly. The legacy is every cargo ship sailing every ocean today. Built using prefabrication techniques Kaiser pioneered, organized using production methods he established, constructed by workers trained using principles he developed. The amateur who had never built a ship revolutionized an industry thousands of years old by asking a simple question: why not? Why not treat ships like manufactured products? Why not use welding instead of riveting? Why not employ assembly line workers instead of master craftsmen? Why not build in 4 days what tradition says requires 8 months? The questions seemed naive to experienced shipbuilders. They were actually revolutionary insights that recognized industrial warfare favored pragmatic efficiency over traditional excellence. Klaus Richter had understood this, through mathematics. Henry Kaiser had proven it through production. Together, they demonstrated that modern warfare is decided by factory workers, not soldiers, by production engineers, not tactical commanders, by the side that can sustain operations, not the side that wins individual battles. The lesson remains relevant today, though few remember the German engineer who predicted defeat through statistics or the American dam builder who manufactured victory through ships. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.